If we compare these two fight scenes, it becomes clear that they are different. One has the fighters floating around, only really interacting with each other, and the other has the fighters really engaging with the environment, jumping around and using it to their advantage. In one, the actors have a real set to interact with, and in the other, there's just a green screen. And I know which one I find more interesting. We can look at D&D encounters in much the same way. Is the environment of the fight just a green screen, or is it an active component in a combat encounter? In the next 3 videos, I will talk about how you can improve combat encounters in your D&D games, and today we're going to start with the environment. When we're talking about the environment in a combat encounter, we're really talking about the setting, what's in it, and how it can affect the battle. We can divide it into 2 categories: static environment and active environment. Static environment is the physical surroundings in which the combat takes place in. It's very clear to see that an encounter in a tavern room compared to in a dank cave pose very different opportunities in a battle. In the first, we can assume that there will be furniture to hurl around, chandeliers to swing from, and so on. And in the other, there will be dark hiding places and stalactites to drop into your enemies and all that kind of stuff. The static environment doesn't interact with the fight, but it can be interacted with by the player characters and their enemies. The best way to show your players how they can use the environment around them to their advantage is by having their enemies teach it to them. If the party faces enemies that use elevation to their advantage to rain down attacks without the players being able to get to them, or maybe hiding behind pillars for cover, or toppling stacks of barrels down onto the characters, or setting curtains on fire to prevent escape, the players might learn that they can do this themselves. Not only does this teach the players how to be more creative in combat, but it also makes the enemies they're fighting more interesting. It's a win-win. Opposed to the static environment, we have the active environment, which is basically everything that is going on around the combat encounter. While static environment doesn't interact with the fight, active environment very much does. If we take the static environment of a cave, for example, we can add the active environment of, for example, lava flowing into that cave, posing a threat to everyone inside. Maybe it restricts movement by filling up spaces, or it might even splash onto opponents or players. Or if it's a fight in the street, we could have a crowd of bystanders that are kind of like looking onto the fight, and if the crowd likes the player characters, they might give them a helping hand, and if they don't, they might oppose them in some other way. As I said, active environment affects combat directly, and it not only helps ground the fight in the world, but it also provides a handy tool for you to balance the fight as it unfolds. If the players are struggling, maybe one of their strong opponents are hit by a splash of lava, or if they're steamrolling this little group of bounty hunters in the street, a crowd of bystanders begin to jeer at them and throw rotten fruit at them to sort of distract and frustrate their attacks. Or maybe there's a cleric in the crowd that recognizes the party's good work and casts healing word on one of the injured characters. It's a subtle way to manipulate the fight without it seeming contrived. An important point about active environment is that it mustn't slow down the game. For example, if you have a crowd of bystanders, they shouldn't each have their own initiative roll and just fill up the initiative tracker. You can simply decide that on every initiative count of 20, something with the active environment happens, much like with lair actions for some specific powerful creatures. To help all of this make sense, I've made a few examples that show static environment and active environment in different combat encounters. Number 1. A sailing ship in ice-filled waters. Here, the static environment is the ship itself, with a lot of rigging for climbing up into, bringing a lot of verticality to the fight. It's also a rather confined space, where opponents can't easily flee from the fight. And there's bound to be a lot of deck equipment lying around for cover, and also for improvised weapons. You could even have a fight where no one starts with weapons, so the players just have to grab whatever they can get, like a broom or like a boarding pike or something like that. Just grab what you have at hand. Now, the active environment comes from all the icebergs that threaten to crash into the ship and sink it, requiring someone to steer the ship clear. Or the icebergs can be dealt with directly, either with maybe a fireball or some other spells, or perhaps even the cannons on the deck. No one can ignore the active environment in this case, and it might even cause some opponents to work together in order to keep their battlefield afloat. Number 2. A sleeping dragon's lair. Here, the static environment might depend on the type of dragon. For example, if it's a green dragon, the cave might be overgrown, humid and full of poisonous pools. There could be a huge pile of treasure that counts as difficult terrain when the characters have to wade through all these coins. The active environment is the sleeping dragon itself. Maybe the party needs to raise a rival gang to steal some kind of artifact from its hoard, but they must do so quietly as to not wake the dragon. Fighting their opponents without making noise becomes the challenge of this environment, and if they fail, they're gonna have a whole different fight on their hands. Number 3. The jungle watched by a tribe of grung. And grung are these frog humanoid creatures. The static environment will be the jungle itself. There'll be tall plants to hide behind, trees to climb into, and poisonous plants to fall on top of or push your opponents into. The active environment is the watching tribe of grung, who are waiting for any combatant to fall unconscious. If this happens, whether it's a player character or not, they will rush in and kidnap them. This might add a sudden frantic chase to an already difficult fight, as one of the player characters are dragged off into the jungle. Again, it's important to note that the watching grung do not partake in the fight, and they do not roll initiative, because that will slow down the game. But of course, if the players then attack them at some point, they then become active combatants. Number 4. A temple overwatched by agents of a god. The static environment is the temple itself. There will be furniture to throw around, silk drapes to light on fire, altars to pray at, and so on. The active environment is the presence of agents of the temple's deity. They watch the fight and either reward or punish the behavior of the party, and maybe even their opponents. Maybe the god frowns upon necromantic magic or the use of bladed weapons. Perhaps they don't like insults, but reward brave deeds. The agents of the deity are powerful, but they will not partake directly in the fight. Or maybe they will. Maybe the party is defending the temple against attackers, and the temple's deity sends an agent to help them. But this agent won't fight the fight for them, but will assist them in some small ways on every initiative count 20. Maybe by healing or empowering or resurrecting or inspiring. Sort of to make it clear that the deity does care about this temple, but not in a way that completely removes the challenge for the players. I hope this helps to show the potential environment has when designing combat encounters. So to conclude, give the environment a thought when you're designing a combat encounter. Next, show the players how to use the environment by having their opponents take advantage of it. Not only does this teach the players what they can do in combat, but it also makes their opponents more interesting to fight. Then, if it's possible, look for a way to add an active element to the environment, but just be aware that this might not always be possible. If you do find some way to add an active environment, make sure that it doesn't become a participant in the fight itself. It's not there to slow down combat, but just for some interesting things to happen at initiative count 20 or at some other trigger that you decide. And that is it for today. As I said in the beginning, this is the first video of 3 where I talk about how to improve D&D combat. So if you want to catch the next one, you can subscribe to the channel. You can also support the channel by giving this video a like and writing a very nice comment down below. I've also started streaming here and there, so if you want to catch one of those, that would be also nice. It's always nice to have people in the chat. I basically do dungeons from scratch, starting by drawing them, then writing content for them, and so on. So if you want to watch this process in excruciating real time, drop by. But until next time, take care of yourself, and I'll see you. Goodbye!